Regardless of whether you have the most advanced estate plan or you have absolutely nothing, everyone deals with probate.
The question is, how long are you going to have to deal with it?
Exactly. To what extent are you mitigating your experience in probate? So it's how much will your family interact with the probate court?
I don't want to have to spend a lot of time in probate, right?
Yeah.
Because now I'm in court. I'm a busy person. I don't want to have to take time off of work or hire attorneys to deal with this for me because I don't want to pay for all that, right? So should I skip the will? What do I need to do to avoid all that? It is Saturday State of Mind. Once more, I'm joined by the amazing attorney Liz Nolin of Nolin Law. She's been working with Arcadia now for God knows how long, but long enough to consider her part of the family. We like to say that we do family planning for the millionaire next door. Oftentimes people have disparate professionals in their lives, right? They have an accountant over here, an attorney across town, their retirement person who's, I don't know, maybe online somewhere. Things are crazy these days. We try to put all that together under one roof and unite all of this so people not only have that one-stop shop, but have a better peace of mind that all of their different disparate parts are working synergistically with each other. At least that's the dream, right? If we're doing our stuff well. It can be sometimes a little bit challenging, though, to put all the pieces together. People tend, Liz, to prioritize, right? They think to themselves, all right, I've got some work to do. I'm going to begin my financial planning journey. And they usually want to start somewhere. Sometimes they go to you first. Oftentimes they come to us. If they do come to us, it's like, hey, I need to get my 401k square. I want to make sure that I'm making all the right tax moves. And then we'll say, okay, cool. We've done some work. We've been educated. We've got all this stuff deployed. Just to put the icing on the cake, the bow on the gift, whatever you want to call it, we should meet with the attorney because if life takes a left turn, we want to make sure all this amazing work that we've done is protected. And then that's sometimes where the walls come up and you hear some of the backpedaling and the excuses. People be like, it's just a tough time. I've got a big trip coming up. Maybe after that, oh, we've got to do some renovations around the house. It's summertime, Mike. Catch me in the fall, right? People like to procrastinate sometimes as it relates to estate planning because I think it's a couple things. People like to procrastinate, right? Yes. But they know that when they go to talking to Liz, I mean, we're in the spooky parlor right now. You're going to be talking to them about death and illness and injury and all this spooky, distinctly unpleasant stuff.
Yes, the things that probably make most people very uncomfortable.
And rightfully so.
Yes,
This
absolutely.
is not pleasant stuff.
No.
But what's more unpleasant is facing any of those dilemmas without a plan.
Exactly.
What I want to do for the people today is do some myth busting, right? Sometimes they're procrastinating or backpedaling because they think that they have a legitimate reason to put things on hold for right or wrong reasons. I don't know if you're going to be able to bust all these myths here, Liz, but give it your best and let's see if we can get people over the hump a little bit and getting that planning going maybe a little bit sooner than later.
Let's do it.
You up for this challenge?
Oh, absolutely.
All right, so we got a list of myths here from the people. The first one I heard is estate planning is only for retirees. I think that might be a nice way of saying estate planning is only for older people, people with gray hair, big assets, big estates, big money. Is that true?
No. I can bust that myth pretty easily. Estate planning is not just for retirees, older people, or wealthy people. It is for everyone. So estate planning itself is pretty broad, but just down to wills, trusts, medical documents, powers of attorney, that's for everyone. Everyone, unfortunately, and here comes my Debbie Downer personality, everyone will deal probably with really bad medical documents or bad medical situations. They will die. We all know that. The one thing that is guaranteed are death and taxes, and I'm in the business of both. So just making sure that people have everything in place. You never know when it's going to be your time. So it's not just for retirees. It is for everyone, especially if you are a parent of young children, which I shouldn't prioritize that over any group, but I'm the parent of a young child, so I'm biased in that degree. If you've got kids, you really need to have all of your ducks in a row in case something bad happens to you. You know your kids are going to be okay, and it's a way that we can minimize trauma that they will experience after they've already lost their parents.
Yeah, I think that's a good rule. I think that once you either have some assets, and you don't have to be at 60, you know, you might be in your 20s or your 30s, you're having success in your career. career or your business, and there's stuff that's valuable and something were to happen to you, you want to make sure it goes to the right place. But certainly too, when your life starts to overlap with that of others, if you're tied down in a relationship, if you've got children, if something happens to you, what happens to those people whose lives are intertwined with yours? So I think what you're saying is, regardless of age, if you find yourself in either of those camps, I've got some assets or I've got some other people who are kind of caught up in the mix with me, that's when I should probably be doing some estate planning.
If you are responsible or you have an element of responsibility in someone else's well-being, you should do estate planning.
If you're we are talking to the United States of America here, Liz. Some people just have to get responsible.
Yes, that too.
All right. Well, we're calling them to action. Yeah. Let's go now into the second myth, right? So when people do decide to get started, they don't have to get right into the most complicated elements of estate planning with there's like intergenerational cross-state line type of planning, right? They might just want to start with the more basic, the more foundational stuff. And a big myth that I often hear is, well, I've got a will. Isn't that enough?
And a will deals with a very specific part of your estate. It deals with what would happen should all of your stuff go through probate. Some people really don't like probate, either because they don't want to go through the court system. They don't want to have anything interfered with the government. They want everything done privately.
Why are we talking about probate? I have a will, Liz. Doesn't my will help skip all the state involvement type stuff?
That is a great question that I really overlooked. If all you have is a will, meaning you do not have a trust, most of your big assets, real estate, bank accounts, things that you own in your personal name go through probate. And probate is a judicial process overseen by a judge. It is governed by very specific statutes, and it can take a really long time to process. It can sometimes take in the neighborhood of 12 to 48 months. Sometimes it's worse. Sometimes it's a little bit faster, but it is never genuinely a good experience for the people involved. At a bare minimum, it's going to be in the neighborhood of about 6 to 8 months, even with your most simple probate stuff.
So all things being equal, a will doesn't help me avoid probate. It more or less guarantees it. Is that?
It guides you through probate.
Got it.
Everybody kisses probate, regardless of whether you have the most advanced estate plan or you have absolutely nothing. Everyone deals with probate.
The question is, how long are you going to have to deal with it?
Exactly. To what extent are you mitigating your experience in probate? And it's really, you won't be here anymore. So it's how much will your family interact with the probate court?
I don't want to have to spend a lot of time in probate, right?
Yeah.
Because now I'm in court. I'm a busy person. I don't want to have to take time off of work or hire attorneys to deal with this for me because I don't want to pay for all that, right? So should I skip the will? What do I need to do to avoid all that?
Well, the big danger in skipping a will is it comes back to the principle of you still have to interact with probate. And only about 24% of Americans are reporting that they have a will in 2025. So for the 75+% of everyone else, you're still going through probate, but now you're doing it by the government's rules. So New Hampshire, just like every other state, has very specific statutes that deal with what happens to estates that go through probate when the person never made a will. We call those intestate probates. Okay. And the government's formula applies. So I think you can imagine that whenever we're dealing with that, things don't always go the way we would like them to go.
So all things being equal, without a will, that's probably where people are spending the most time in probate because there's been no guidance. The will, maybe a little bit less times because some guidance has been provided, right? But if we want to try to speed through the process, have less be involved in probate or similar, I might need some more advanced estate planning. Is that fair?
Yes, absolutely. And that's where we start diving into the world of trusts, where trusts themselves, you can kind of think of them like an entity, a living, breathing structure that you put assets into during your life. And because it lives on past you, assets in a trust don't need to go through probate.
So I can't fault too many people for believing or wanting to believe in myth number 2 there, that a will is enough, because I think for them, doing a will is relatively simplistic. There's free templates online for crying out loud. And even if you go just slightly beyond the free stuff, if you engage an attorney, they're usually not going to charge all that much for a will because, again, it's a relatively simple document. So I think people oftentimes that are stuck in option 2 or with myth 2, right? Like, is a will enough? They're trying to save a couple bucks.
Yes.
Now, basically on the heels of all that, people are thinking, okay, great. So a will isn't enough. I probably need to do a little bit more. And that leads into myth number 3. Whatever else is going to come out of Mike and Liz's mouth, whatever they're going to suggest, all the beyond the will stuff, it's going to be way too expensive.
Yeah.
You have anything to say to that?
Absolutely. If you think proactive legal expenses are expensive, reactive legal expenses are even worse. So what I mean by that is estate planning, it does cost money up front because you're hiring a lawyer to draft pretty complicated documents for you. Nothing is as simple as it appears. And when very good estate planning documents are drafted, they don't read simple, but they look really clear. That is an incredible art form in and of itself. And so I write these documents, but a lot of other attorneys do too. And a lot of us end up almost being artists with language, the way that we can write. We make it look easy, but it's not easy at all. So the creation of trust documents and other estate planning documents, they're complicated and that's why they're expensive. But going through probate, you don't need an attorney to go through it. But it is a very regimented process with very strict deadlines and very strict requirements. Most people hire a lawyer to help them through that entire process. Those attorneys charge retainers by and large, and the initial retainers are never a guarantee of what a final cost will be for probate. In my experience, the asked retainer for a lot of probate attorneys is less than the cost of a full estate planning package.
Now, I know that in my experience, I've seen some estate plans that have cost 5 figures or more, right?
Yeah.
And rightfully so. Usually you're talking about ultra high net worth households,
Yes.
business owners, people with multiple assets in multiple states. Stuff can get complicated pretty fast.
Yes.
But a basic plan, and it depends on what state you're in and how many kids you've got, what kind of assets are at stake. You might be talking about a few $1,000s.
Yes.
And listen, I get it. Post-COVID, with inflation and everything else, every dollar counts. And a few $1,000s for a lot of people is a vacation,
Yes.
right? But we often have to examine what truly is at stake and then therefore what really is the cost, right?
Yes.
Because there's costs either way. I don't have to have an estate plan, but what if my kids start to gouge their eyes out fighting over my assets after
Yes.
I'm dead? What if the accounts that I leave behind don't enrich people's lives, but it spoils them, or it causes infighting, or it causes marriages to start drifting apart? Do you want any of that to happen to your family? What would you pay for that to not happen? In fact, if I could know that my family would use the money wisely and stay together and be enriched, to me, that would be a priceless outcome. I want this money to do good things. I'm willing to pay a couple $100 or a few thousand to kind of ensure that directionally things are more so heading in that direction than gambling that they might end up there.
And you're touching on a really good topic of just what really is the cost of doing this. Because with a lot of estate planning, you're fronting the cost now, and you are proactively dealing with problems so they don't need to arise. One area that is really important to address are also taxes. A lot of people engage in what I call country justice probate, where they start trying to add kids to things like deeds or bank accounts or other assets. They just want to add someone on there to try and keep it out of probate. So when one person dies, survivor gets to keep it. That can have significant tax consequences to it. And sometimes the amount owed in taxes far exceeds what the cost of the estate planning would have done.
Let's go into our 4th myth here. I don't have any kids. I don't need an estate plan.
That's a really common thing that I hear. But if you have anybody in your life that you truly care about, you should have an estate plan, because children are fantastic, but not everybody needs to have
Some kids are fantastic,
Exactly.
Liz. Want to qualify that one?
Yeah, some are fantastic. The others, they
Your
are
daughter's pretty fantastic.
And so your kids are great too.
They're young.
But
Jury's still out on my boys.
we'll see in a couple of years then. But having children doesn't qualify you as being any better than people who don't. And as the years progress, a lot of people are choosing not to have children. And that doesn't mean you still don't have an estate. You still don't have people in your life that are really valuable to you. So just because you have kids doesn't mean you're suddenly in this class where now you matter more, you should be doing planning more. If you have anyone in your life, even if you are single, unmarried, no living family, you probably still have friends that you would want getting your stuff. And the nightmare situation, which can sometimes happen, is that if you pass away, you have no family. If we go far enough out and you really don't have family, your money can go to the state. And I do sound very biased that I wouldn't want my money going to the state, but that's because I really wouldn't want my money going to the state. That's just how I feel about private money staying private. We pay a lot of taxes for a reason, and that should be more than plenty. But with people's estates, it doesn't matter if you have kids. Sure. You should always govern where your stuff goes. I'm a big fan of control. Take control over where your assets go after you die.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you there. And I would add my own flavor to the stew here. There are some pretty cynical people who will say, I'm dead. I don't really care what happens to my stuff after I'm gone. We had a conversation, in a previous episode, you should check it out, about medical planning, where we discussed that estate planning is really two distinct realms. People often just focus on the first, which is what happens to my stuff after I'm gone. But there's an element of estate planning that's focused on what happens while you're still alive,
Exactly.
but you're not in a position to speak for or represent yourself, right? So if you're ill in the hospital, you're not able to make medical or financial decisions. It doesn't matter how many kids that you have. Just about everybody probably has some amount of work to do there to make sure that their wishes are carried out for them while they're still alive.
Exactly, because these really are the documents that speak when you can't. We're not necessarily creating documents that are dealing with what happens right now while we're talking to each other and we have full capacity and control over everything. For some super wealthy clients, we're dealing with that we're distancing their money already during their life for whatever reason. But for a lot of people, this is planning for the worst case scenario. That is why it's called estate planning. We're planning for the things that we don't want to happen, but that really might, and that a lot of people deal with. They deal with it enough that these are in statutory form. So wherever there is a form, there is a reason. So it is estate planning, obviously denotes estate, denotes after you have passed away. But this is also during life. And what you want really does matter. And you've got the right to take control. And I really think people should.
Liz, when I negotiated with your agent for the terms of today's conversation, they said I could only hit you with 4 myths.
Yes.
But I'm going to try to stretch a buckle here a little bit and try to get more out of you today. I want to see if you can bust the 5th and final.
Let's do it.
I know some people, especially on the heels of the one concerning a will isn't enough, and I'm concerned about expenses. They also tend to say, okay, well, if I'm going to go have a conversation with somebody like Liz and do some estate planning, I'm worried. I've heard that if I create a trust, I'm going to lose control of my stuff. Yes. And I'm going to have to bring in somebody else, a trustee who's going to be in charge. And I don't want anybody else having control over my stuff while I'm alive. And that myth is preventing them from even having this conversation. What can we do to bust this idea that trusts somehow divorce you of having control over your stuff while you're living?
There are umpteen kinds of trusts. Trust is just a word to describe a kind of contractually based entity style creature that's alive, that can hold assets. But there are a lot of different kinds of trusts. And I know a lot of people get a lot of resources about trust primarily because of Medicaid, which often does require that distancing of assets and what people know as the 5-year look back window. But you don't have to make a trust that divorces you from control over your assets or puts you in a situation where your assets can't be used for you. Probably the most trusts that I write are revocable trusts, where in effect, my clients' lives day to day don't really change. They keep complete control over their assets and they benefit from those assets for their whole lives. It's basically how you're handling your money anyway. We're just putting the legal titles on all of the roles that you're organically operating in. So just because it's a trust, it doesn't mean you have to give every ounce of power away. There are trusts and then there are trusts. And this is why it's very important for clients to at least meet with estate planning attorneys, because if you do this area of law, you've picked it for a reason. This is the only area that I focus my practice in. I'm very passionate about it, but there's a lot of information I know that, of course, I know it. It's my job. How would the average person know? So I would just invite anybody who has questions about this stuff, talk to an attorney who actually can help you, who is licensed and able to do everything in this world, because we'll be able to walk you through all of your options and decide what's best for you, and then genuinely give you good advice rather than you watching a million YouTube videos trying to educate yourself on a very intricate topic.
Yeah, I think unless you have really good access to, say, a great medium or an archangel or similar, nobody tells you when your day and time is coming.
Exactly.
Right? And it's not just death. It could be a health event. And you're either prepared for it or you're not. Yes. And there's a lot of bad information out there. There's a lot of fake news, right? Yes. And as a result of some of this, people either procrastinate, they put their heads in the sand, they resist this type of planning. I believe that you said if you've got something at stake, assets, if it's not assets, at least it's your own health. If you're worried about anything that might happen if life goes sideways and you're thinking, I don't really know if I have a plan, you probably don't. And I would start by having a conversation, get yourself educated, make sure that you can at some point have the peace of mind knowing that if something happens to me, right, I got all my affairs in order. Right? Because regardless of expense, regardless of what complications you invite or leave at bay, you'll have a plan as opposed to nothing. And nothing is where all the problems start.
Absolutely.
Right? It's where people get stuck in probate. It's where stuff gets left in the hands of hospital administrators. It's where, family starts to fight with themselves. All of this is totally avoidable for the most part.
Yes.
With a great estate plan.
Exactly.
Right? So don't let a bad or a good myth, I guess I should say, stand in the way of you and having that conversation. I'd love if you were to like and subscribe, because Liz and I are going to be having all sorts of additional conversations on other myths, as well as all sorts of great estate planning topics. So we'll see you next time on Saturday State of Mind.
If you liked this video and it helped you, watch another one, and don't forget to hit subscribe.